Stories are for children. Does that sound right? Many of us, when we were kids, we read fiction or we had stories read to us and we enjoyed them very much and engaged our imagination. But as we grow older, many of us grow out of it. Yes, we may still be reading, but just reading stories feels unproductive. So if I'm going to be reading something, I'm going to read a business book, I'm going to read a productivity book, I'm going to spend my time productively. And so we lose the habit of reading stories. Do not read non-fiction prior to bed, which encourages projection into the future, preoccupation, and planning. Read fiction that engages the imagination and demands present state attention. So perhaps there are some benefits to reading fiction, but there's still the downside of we have only 24 hours in a given day. So is it worth spending half an hour or 1 hour of that time on reading fiction? And to find out, we did one of our 7-day challenges. The parameters of this challenge are very simple. Before going to sleep, the last thing you need to do is read some fiction. Not non-fiction, just a story. And also, it's important not to read this on a backlit screen. So you can read it using a paper book or something like a Kindle or an e-ink device, but you shouldn't be staring at your phone or an iPad or something like that that's going to be shining light into your eyes as you're reading. We really don't want that to be the last thing we do before bed. My main idea behind this challenge was to see if it would help me fall asleep. Because when I do have trouble falling asleep, it's almost always because my mind wanders. I'm lying there and I'm planning ahead. I'm thinking about the next project I'm working on. I'm trying to kind of almost plan my tasks for the next day or do them in my imagination. It's this kind of rumination that usually prevents me from falling asleep easily. I wanted to see if I engage my mind with a story instead, would that help me fall asleep? And Ryan and Jonas from the team decided to join me in this challenge as well. I chose to read The Warrior's Apprentice because it's a book I read when I was a teenager and it left an impression. Originally, I thought that reading fiction would be unproductive, but perhaps help me sleep. But in the work on this video, we actually found that there's some research that shows there are measurable benefits to reading fiction. Reading fiction can increase our emotional intelligence and our empathy skills because it forces us to put ourselves into other people's shoes and almost live through their struggles. And this translates into the real world. So maybe this whole thing is more productive than I originally thought it would be. Additionally, it may also reduce stress and increase our creativity as well as our vocabulary. I took to this challenge very quickly. I hadn't read a fiction book in many years, but basically as soon as I started reading, I was totally into it again. And if anything, I didn't want to put the book down. So on the one hand, I kind of wanted to keep reading, but on the other hand, I did also notice that it did help me kind of unwind and relax. And the first nights, I definitely had no trouble falling asleep. The challenge was going well for myself and Jonas, not so much for Ryan. Perhaps this means the challenge was more effective than we thought it would be.
So the book I read was called The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, and the reason I picked this book was because it was one of the books on the bookshelf at the villa that we were staying at in the Algarve, and I heard it got good reviews, so I decided to give it a try. So I wanted to do the challenge because I basically never read fiction. I only read non-fiction books because I tell myself I don't have time. I was curious to see if I liked it. I used to read a lot of fiction in the past, and if it helped me sleep easier as well. So I was so exhausted by the end of the day that once I actually opened the book to start reading, I would just, before I know it, be falling asleep.
I chose The Last Templar, one of the books we found in our villa. I think the prologue made me curious, so I was just like, no idea what this is about, let's go. I wanted to do the challenge because I've not been reading fiction for a long time, and I almost forgot how like a book like this flows, and I just wanted to revisit it. When on the second, third, fourth day, and I was still reading with candles, I was falling asleep after like a 6-page chapter, no problem. Sometimes it wasn't easy to sit down and read the pages. Surprisingly, one of the good things was that I chose a book which I did not know anything about, because I would not have read this kind of book under usual circumstances. It opened up this new world, kind of. It's almost like you read the author, not only the book. and all the knowledge that he had and that I've never come in contact with basically was streaming through the pages to me. And that was really interesting. It really made me feel like I could benefit way more from different ways of thinking and different ways of how characters interact and what options they have available to do things and to move in the world. Like, there's so much inspiration to be had.
For myself, this worked extremely well. Reading fiction before bed definitely helps me fall asleep, and this whole mind-wandering thing just doesn't seem to happen when the last thing I do before sleep is read a good story.
Anyone who's thinking, oh yeah, reading fiction is a waste of time, should definitely try this out. You know, because it's like the advice I would give to myself 2 weeks ago is like, read this book.
Did you finish the book?
Yeah, I'm reading the second one now.
Oh, cool. I might read those ones you're talking about.
Yeah.
I also noticed that I really got interested in reading fiction again, and it's a good alternative. Sometimes in moments where usually I would do something kind of mind-numbing, maybe watch some YouTube or something, I actually wanted to reach for a book instead. It became a more interesting alternative, and I think that's a great sign. But more than that, this challenge was actually surprisingly deep and moving for me because of the book I chose. Like I mentioned, I chose a book that I had read as a teenager. I didn't remember much about it other than that it really left an impression. And rereading this book was like visiting an old friend and also an old mentor. There were many scenes in this book that I had basically forgotten about, but clearly they were like burned into my subconscious. And this book features the character Miles Vorkosigan, who basically is one of my most important role models. Rereading this book made me notice just how much of an influence this character had on me and how much of an influence this story had on the development of my life and my character. For example, there is a principle in this book espoused by the main character called forward momentum. And I'd forgotten that the character literally calls it that. He calls it forward momentum. It's kind of a way of life, right? Keep stumbling forward, even if it looks like you're failing, just keep moving forward. This has become a deeply ingrained habit of mine, and I'd forgotten that this book is where it comes from. There were also some quotes in this book that the moment I read them again, they just immediately surfaced in my memory again, and these have become like leading principles of how I live my life. Here's an example. When the time comes to leap in faith, whether you have your eyes open or closed, or whether you scream all the way down or not, makes no practical difference. I am really happy that I did this challenge and that I got to revisit this book. And it made me wonder, actually, if this book ended up having a greater influence on my life's outcomes than any business or self-help book I've ever read. So that's our Read Fiction Before Bed challenge and the surprising conclusions we came to. As I'm sure you can tell, I absolutely recommend this. If, like me, you haven't touched a fiction book in years because it feels unproductive to you, give this a try. Read some really good fiction before bed and see what happens. Do you have any favorite books to recommend? Any stories that influenced you in a big way? Let us know by leaving a comment below, and be sure to subscribe to get more videos like this coming soon.